Welcome to the Graybeard Chronicles podcast. Your hosts, Brian Halstead and Kevin Harkins, are two gray-bearded patriots who love God, their family and friends, and their country. The Graybeards are here to inspire, inform, and educate you on a myriad of topics they are passionate about. Brian and Kevin have a strong desire to share this with you to help you live your best life. Sit back and enjoy this amazing podcast as the Graybeards pass along the wisdom of the ages.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Graybeard Chronicles. I'm Brian Halstead.
And I'm Kevin Harkins.
And Kevin, we're here to pass along some wisdom of the ages. What the heck does that mean?
We're not perfect, but we do have gray beards. And that means we've got some significant life experience, some life lessons, and some perspectives that are worthy of passing along.
Well, I think that sums it up nicely. Let's get to it. Kevin, what's going on?
How you doing, Bryant?
I'm well, thank you. I'm feeling a little long in the tooth tonight.
Why is that?
It's just a phrase that I've been, certainly it's not the first time I've heard that, but I was recently re-exposed to that phrase. And, we talk about the wisdom of the ages and the graybeards and so on. And I guess, I'm good with that. I identify with that, but the whole long in the tooth thing, I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way. Yeah. When somebody else, kind of, lumps you into that category, it's like, oh shit, I guess I am.
You deserve to be lumped. And that
that was weird.
That's not a
I don't know where you're going with that.
Lump. No, you deserve to be lumped into that category.
Oh, okay, I got
that's
it.
Right. That's all I meant by that. Congratulations on kicking off the podcast, by the way, without any problems. All good.
Yeah, this is like 3 weeks in a row, man. But it's early. I could still jack it up.
Speaking of long in the tooth, we have a guest tonight who we're very excited to have here, and
who could potentially be the one that exposed me or re-exposed me to that term so recently, right?
Yeah. I really don't know what that means. What is it?
Long in the tooth? Yeah, I think you do.
You want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
Let's do it.
So we have an exciting guest with us tonight. The gentleman's name is Mr. Terry Tucker, and he is he's an author and a sought-after speaker, and he believes in the power of a good story to motivate, inspire, and help others lead their uncommon and extraordinary lives. And he combines his 10-year cancer journey with his diverse business, athletic coaching, and law enforcement expertise. And he delivers a compelling yet relatable presentation for conferences, online events, panels, meetings, and seminars. And Kevin, we might be a little bit of a rookie category tonight because he's done over 400 podcasts. So you better be on your A game tonight, and I'll see if I can bring mine too.
Very good.
But most organizations stop having those events, and man, it's a really cool way that he went about doing this. His speaking topics include how to live your uncommon and extraordinary purpose and the 4 truths to leading a resilient life. And if you want to find out more about Terry, and certainly he's going to share with us tonight, but his website is motivationalcheck.com. So make sure you go there, visit, figure out more info there. And I know he's going to talk about his book, but welcome, Terry. Thanks for being here.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it. And in full disclosure, yes, I am the one who brought up long in the tooth. So.
Long in the tooth. Yep.
It's all good. Brian, a word that you used when talking about Terry when you were introducing him was the word relatable.
Yeah.
And that's really true because you're such a diverse person, Terry, that all the different things that you've done. And it really is unusual where somebody has had to reinvent themselves so many times based on changes in the direction of your life. I don't know. Do you have a comment on that? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at my resume, I kind of look at it and figure one of these days I got to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. I mean, I really have, in a lot of ways, been lucky, but had to make a lot of decisions. So I guess I'll just give you sort of the condensed version of me. Born and raised in Chicago, oldest of 3 boys. You can't tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall. Played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. Another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So I sort of joked that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on in front of us. But yet our 5'8" mother was the boss. Didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom says, that's the way it went. Graduated from college, moved home to find a job. I'm going to be a little long in the tooth here and date myself. So this was long before the internet was available to help people find a job. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. Unfortunately, I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. As I said, started out marketing at Wendy's, became a hospital administrator, made a major pivot in my life, became a police officer. Part of being a police officer, I was an undercover narcotics investigator. I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. Then started my own school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 10 years, have been dealing with this rare form of cancer. And then I guess just to round it out, my wife and I have been married for 28 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Wow. Okay.
Very cool.
That's a neat story. There's a whole bunch of things I can ask you about there.
There you go. Pick a rabbit hole, right?
There's so many. Yeah.
Well, I'm intrigued too, Kevin, by the topic, right? Because, it's like, your resume is not, okay, well, it makes sense. He did this and then kind of branched out and did this. It was kind of like he did this and he did this and he did, I understand that there's, and it's a shame that more people in business don't understand that there's connections with someone's abilities and how those are transferable into anything. Just because you're in this particular line of work doesn't mean that the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have aren't going to transfer over and you do something totally different, like going from marketing in a Wendy's to a hospital administrator. Most people would have a hard time making that jump, but it's about people skills and I just think that's cool the way that's worked out. But you're right, it's definitely not a path from A to Z. It's like, I like it.
Yeah, follow the bouncing ball, right?
Yeah.
So in light of your journey, I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this over the past several days. You had a journey that is really unusual just because of the diversity of it. But I know that you're a man of faith. And so what do you think it is? I'll just ask you straight up. What do you think it is that God is doing with your life to, to impact the people around you and the world around you?
I think right now it's finding our purpose. I've always believed that regardless of what we do or we believe, our purpose in life is to serve. If you believe in God like I do and like you guys do, it's to serve God, but it's also to serve ourselves and to serve our fellow man and things like that. So I think right now my purpose is different than when my purpose when I was younger, and I literally ate, drank, slept basketball. I went to bed with a basketball. I got up with a basketball. That was my purpose. And then when I graduated from college, I felt my purpose was to be in law enforcement. And now I feel my purpose is literally to put as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love, whatever you want to call it, back into the world as I can with whatever time I have left. So I think, God sort of works in mysterious ways. There's sort of that old joke that says, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So, there's,
I never actually heard that. I think that's great.
I do too.
I don't think, I know God has never directly talked to me, but I think what God does is put people on our path and says, hey, Terry, you should write a book, or hey, Terry, you should do this, or hey, Terry, you should do that. And I think when enough people start making that decision, I think that's God's way of saying, hey, dummy, buck up here and listen to what I'm telling you. But again, it's our choice. We say, no, don't feel like writing a book. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go on this path. And that's our choice. And that's, that's part of the whole free will thing.
Yeah, you reminded me when you said the whole book thing, there was that piece in your book about having the journey that you went on to find somebody to publish it. 150, I think you said, agents that you contacted and asked them to take a look at your book and consider publishing it, and it was every single one of them was a rejection. And I don't remember, and I might have missed it because I was reading fast. I mean, I know obviously your book is published now. I bought it off of Amazon, but how did that happen? Because you obviously persevered, and that's one of the key lessons, I think.
I got lucky. I was a policeman in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I live in Colorado now, and I happened to be put in touch with a man who was an assistant chief at Dayton, Ohio Police Department. That's kind of a sister, it's almost a suburb of Cincinnati, Dayton. And he and I had been talking, and he said, I've got this friend, because I was telling him, I said, I've got this book, but it's not getting any traction. And he said, I've got this friend of mine. He said, great story. And it really is. This man also was an undercover narcotics investigator and eventually became a police chief at a medium-sized city in Louisiana. And one day, one of his buddies says, hey, would you mind coming out to California and putting on a presentation for authors that are interested in understanding police tactics so they can incorporate them in their books and, sound like they know what they're talking about? He's like, yeah, sure. Sounds like a great trip to California. I'll do it. He ends up going out there and meeting his wife. And his wife is like a 35-time best-selling fiction author. And the two of them get married. He gets out of law enforcement, and they start, among other things, a not-for-profit publishing company. And so I got hooked up with him. He read the manuscripts, said, yes, we'd like to do this. So I was very fortunate that I had access to, editors and cover designers and, people to lay it out and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have to self-publish it. It ended up being something that I just was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I love the cover, by the way. I don't know who's responsible for picking that artwork out, but man, just the mental image that when I saw it, what that created for me is just cool. It's there's a path,
There is, and the path is leading forward, and it's leading upward, and what I loved about it, they're like, well, what colors do you like? And what, and I'm like, well, I like blue. I like, and they sent me an initial cover, and I was like, oh my God, I needed sunglasses to look at it. It was so, vivid blue. I'm like, no, I don't think that's it. And, I showed it to my brothers. I showed it to my daughter, my wife, and I forget who it was that said, well, what about a path? Oh yeah, that might be good. So I went back to him and I said, no, this isn't going to work. How about a path? And literally this was the second, rendering of the cover, and it was like, yeah, boom, that's it. That's what I like, and so it just worked out.
That's a great story. There's so many good quotes in your book, but there's one thing that I pulled out of it that I really personally can resonate with, and I would like to ask you to expound upon it a little bit. And it's this one where it says, we don't like to live in an uncomfortable state, but that is where the real growth occurs. Oh my goodness, is that true? I mean, it's easy to just cruise when life is good and all is well and everybody's happy and things are really moving. But when the waters get a little rough and we start to get uncomfortable, it gets a little hectic. Can you talk about that in your own life?
Sure. I mean, our brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. So to the brain, the way things are right now, the status quo, it's good, it's comfortable, it's familiar. Don't mess with it, leave it alone. But the only way we're going to grow, the only way we're going to get better, the only way we're going to improve is if we step outside those comfort zones and do things that make us uncomfortable. I used to constantly remind my team when I was coaching in high school that they needed to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And, I've been on this 10-year cancer journey, and we're all going to experience pain in our lives. It doesn't have to be cancer pain or even any kind of a chronic or terminal illness. It could be something simple like you break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or, you have a fender bender on the way to church, or somebody at work gets the promotion that you think you deserve. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, on the other hand, suffering's optional. Suffering's what you do with that pain. Do you take it and use it to make you a stronger and more determined individual? Or do you wallow in it and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you? It's really a choice. And, I go to treatment now every 3 weeks. And the way I look at it, it's a treatment that's probably not going to save my life, but it may be a treatment that the doctors, based on the data that they can glean from me and from other patients, may be able to synthesize a drug that saves somebody else's life down the road. And again, when I go to treatment, do I have to go to treatment or do I get to go to treatment? It's which handle do you want to grab? I mean, do you have to go to work or do you get to go to work? Do you have to go to church? Do you get to go to church? I mean, it's all how you look at it. And like I said, we're all going to experience pain in our lives, but instead of running from that pain, what if you took it? What if you just took it and flipped it inside and burned it as fuel and used it as energy to make you a stronger person? I know you can do that. I know your audience can do it because I am the biggest wimp in the world. And if I can do it, anybody listening to us can do it.
Whew. I don't know what you're thinking, Brian, but that's that was excellent.
I'm thinking that there's no false advertising and is motivating and inspiring people.
Right.
That just the way that you share that information is, it's definitely inspiring. I did want to talk more about purpose. You mentioned purpose, and strangely enough, that's the second conversation today I've had with somebody about purpose. It came up in an earlier conversation with a friend. Let's talk more about the need for people, I believe, in their lives to understand that. I think there's a lot of people that walk around aimlessly, just going through life, existing instead of actually living. And I think not having a purpose is the cause in many cases.
I think you're right. And I kind of look at it like this, that there are so many people. Let me back up. And I'm going to use a huge generalization here. So cut me a little bit of slack here. I've seen in my law enforcement career, and certainly in these 10 years that I've been fighting cancer, a lot of people die. And the people, again, here's where the generalization comes in. The people that seem to die what we would call happy or peaceful deaths seem to be the people who did something with their life. They got out there, they found the reason they were put on the face of this earth, they used their unique gifts and talents, and they lived that reason. Versus the people who, go kicking and screaming, they want another month or another year to do that. Those seem to be the people who never did anything with their lives. Again, major generalization there. But the way I look at it is, so many people, and I think you're right, so many people live a casual life. And as a result, their goals, their dreams, their ambitions become a casualty of that unplanned living. And I think the frustration, oh, whatever, I'll wait till tomorrow. I mean, I'm not telling people that, there's never a time to relax, there's never a time to have a good time, but you need to understand what your purpose in life is. And being men of faith, if you think about it, there has never been, nor will there ever be, anybody on the face of this earth like me, like you guys, nobody. And when you start to think about that and try to wrap your mind around the fact that I am so unique, that God knew all my faults, all my sins, all the goofy stuff I was going to do, and yet still loved me enough to put me on the face of this earth with my gifts and talents to try to make his world a better place. That sometimes for me is just like, mind blown kind of thing. My mind is a little too feeble to get to a point where I can even think about that.
There's a statistic out there about that. I think we've talked about it, the number, and I don't remember the number, but it's a huge number. The chances of you being you, it's like one in, however many gazillion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's a great point. But yeah, I think, understanding what your purpose is I think hugely important, and people need to, take time to figure that out.
They do, but that's the problem. People get they start down their road to a goal, and then they butt up against some kind of an impediment. Something gets in their way, and they quit. And then they're like, "Well, we don't just quit. We got to blame somebody. we got to find somebody out there that we've got to blame. We've got to blame our parents or our boss or our station in life. And I remember when I got cancer, people were like, well, who do you blame? I'm like, what? What do you mean, who do I blame? Well, you got to blame somebody. I'm like, no, I don't blame anybody. And then they found out, that I have faith. And it's like, well, you must blame God. And I sort of joke with them, like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I mean, I don't think that has happened at all, but God certainly has given me the strength to get through this when there have been times where literally I was begging to die. I was like, please take me out of this. I can't deal with this anymore. So I don't think we ever get to a point where, this isn't about us. This isn't about us individually. This is about us collectively and what we can do together. And people get to the point where I always use the example of Colonel Sanders. Now, I don't know if Kentucky Fried Chicken was Colonel Sanders' purpose in life. But if it was, think about how it would have been if he would have given up when he was 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, because Colonel Sanders didn't found Kentucky Fried Chicken until he was in his 60s, until he's after he retired. So I don't want people to to think that, oh, when I'm 30, if I haven't found my purpose, well, then my life is over. It's not. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this is a lot of times we feel that our purpose has to be our occupation or our job. It doesn't. I mean, you can have a job over here and it's what you do to pay the bills, but your purpose is to write or to paint or to be podcast hosts or whatever it is in your heart that you feel you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. A concept that we've talked about on our podcast before, and you hit on it, using every possible thing that happens in your life, especially if it's bad, as fuel. You used that term just a few minutes ago. And my own sort of interpretation of that, not interpretation, the way that I live, is there's opportunity everywhere. You just have to look for it. I mean, every single event, every circumstance that you go through in your life, there's opportunity there. You just have to find it. And most people never look for it unless, there's some blazing obvious thing that falls right in front of them. They go, I think that might be an opportunity. But truly, I mean, anything that happens, all you have to do is stop and say, where's the opportunity in this? And that's exactly what you are doing, because you are eating this stuff for fuel. And, just having watched a number of your podcasts and read about you, I mean, you're on a mission and you're doing it with energy. And so there's fuel coming from someplace, and it's remarkable. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking the time to be inspirational to people like me and Brian who look at you and say, wow, we came across a good one on this podcast guest.
Yeah, no doubt. You've probably been called this before, maybe not, but I would certainly tag you in the category of a warrior. And what I mean by that is not always. I think that people can be warriors in many ways, right? So I think the traditional way is people think about battle, physical conflict and so on. I think that's only one aspect of being a warrior. I think people that live a mind set and live their life of service, serving other people, I think that's a warrior's way too. And if you drawing back to the whole idea of the different things that you did in your career, they all have a common theme of service. So I think sometimes people, and I'm circling back to purpose again, because I think a lot of times people just don't see the evidence in front of them. Their purpose is there for them to see. And if they take time and sit back and reflect and watch what they've been doing and remember what they get the greatest joy out of, it'll pop to the surface for them.
It will. And that's what I always tell people, search for your purpose with an open heart. If you do that, it will present itself. It may not be today. It may not be tomorrow. It may not be 6 years from now. But if you keep searching with an open heart, it will present itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you to, I know you wrote a whole book about this, but if you could just kind of summarize this, and I'm thinking about people who are listening who probably aren't going to buy your book, but they may enjoy the podcast. What is excellence? How do you achieve it? And more importantly, how do you sustain it? If you were just going to summarize that in a minute or two, how would you do that?
Yeah, I always get that question. You wrote
Okay.
a book called Sustainable Excellence. What is
Right.
excellence?
Right.
And my response is, I don't know. I don't. And I talk about that in the introduction to the book that, I may look at something, that's excellent and say that's excellent. Bryant may look at something and say, yeah, they're good, but they're not excellent. And, excellence, like beauty, is kind of in the eye of the beholder. And you know it when you see it. So it's hard for me to say this is excellence. You've got to figure that out for yourself. But the sustainable part of it, and I've seen this over, whether it was my career in law enforcement or my career in business, where, people work their butts off and they get to the top of the mountain. And what do? They kind of sit back, pour themselves, some little scotch, put their feet up on the desk, and they're like, I have arrived. And what happens? 6 months from now, a year from now, boom, somebody passes them up. And why do they pass them up? Because they stopped. They think, well, once I get here, I'm excellent. I've reached the top of the mountain. Well, how do I sustain excellence? You sustain excellence by changing, by adapting, by doing things differently. And people don't understand that. They think that excellence is a point, sort of out there. And when I get there, I can just sort of put my feet up on the desk and everything's going to be great. Well, if you want to sustain that excellence, you have to figure out how to do things differently. You have to figure out how to get better at what you're doing. And that may be entirely changing how you do business. And that's a big task for a lot of people who have worked incredibly hard to get to that point. So I guess that would be sort of my definition of excellence. And then once you get excellence, how you sustain it.
Yeah, that I've arrived syndrome is the kiss of death. Man, I'm glad you called that out. Thinking back to your law enforcement days, right? People are often worried about rookies and they think it's a dangerous job. I think that the most safe people in law enforcement are the rookies because they're the ones that are, everything's new and they're paying attention to everything. It's the ones that I think like the 5-year to, 10-year mark is when the complacency might set in. And it's the most common time. And that's just, that's the kiss of death too, because it's that whole I've arrived syndrome. So yeah, can't get sucked into that trap.
No.
Here's another quote. It's not a quote. I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it written down, but you'll appreciate this, Bryant. And then Terry, I'd like you to comment on it as well. But he includes in the book, Terry does, a quote from Vince Lombardi. And it's something like this, him talking to his players. We are going to pursue perfection relentlessly. That's not the end of the quote, but that's what I'm going to stop for a second because I'm the first person to say, and I've said it more than 1,000 times in my life, perfect is the enemy of good enough. But this is Vince Lombardi we're talking about. So he says, we're going to pursue perfection relentlessly. And basically, along that journey, we're going to capture excellence. That is just that. I love that. I love the way that sort of unfolds intellectually for you because you're not going to be perfect because you never are.
Right.
But along the way, you're going to do something and you're going to go, that is excellent. That is truly excellent. I don't know. Brian, and then Terry, what do you think about that, Brian?
No, I like it. It reminds me of, and I don't know if I'll get this exactly right, but it's something about, shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, you'll land among the stars.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's the same kind of thing, right? As long as you have that mindset of pursuing that perfection, and don't let it, paralyze you and cause you not to keep going. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if you understand, when, everybody thinks Lombardi was a great coach and the Packers were a great team. Well, when Lombardi took over the Packers, they were terrible.
Right.
I mean, I think they'd won 3 games in like 2 seasons, and here's this guy who comes into this, group of professional athletes, like, Vince Lombardi, who the heck are you? And he walks through the door and that's what he says to him. Gentlemen, we will relentlessly pursue perfection, knowing full well that we will never catch it. But along the way, we will catch excellence. Now, how do you not run through the door, or run through the wall after somebody says that, And right. I think ever since then, the Packers have been great, but it's that attitude. It's that mindset. It's that, we are not going to be let down. We're not going to let each other down. We're going to hold each other accountable. It's all the, the great coaches, the Krzyzewskis, the Bobby Knight, the Vince Lombardis, the John Woodens. All of them had that mindset. I remember Bobby Knight, when I was playing basketball in Chicago, I was in high school. I played on the same conference with Isaiah Thomas, who went on to Indiana, won a national championship, and then went on to play with the Pistons in the NBA. And I used to see Isaiah when he would come home in the summer. And I'm like, what's Knight like? And he's like, the guy loves his players. He said, but he's got this great quote, and it's this: mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. So here's this, elite coach teaching premier athletes how to be great basketball players. But what he's really saying with that quote is your mind, or your mindset, is 4 times more important than your physical body is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Will is always more valuable than ability.
Yeah. Yeah.
In many cases.
Well, pretty much always, I think, if you make up your mind to do it.
Yeah, but I said that, and then I'm kind of hedging on it for a second, because I'm like, I don't want a doctor working on me that has the will to do a good job. I'd like for him to have the skill to do a good job too.
What's that Holtz quote? He's like, what do you call the guy who finishes last in medical school? Doctor?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like...
There you go.
Yep.
There you go. Yeah, you mentioned John Wooden, and I've talked about it many times. I love John Wooden, and I love his story, and I love the fact that, people today think about NCAA national championships, and, if you three-peat, you're really something special. And, if you're John Wooden, you 7-peat. And, that's it's like he blew the doors off so bad that people can't even relate to it. And you know what? And you know this because you know basketball and you know him. He never talked about winning, and he never talked about what their record was going to be. He just said, I'm going to be your coach, and I'm going to help each one of you individually reach your maximum potential as individuals. Of course, whether you do or not is up to you. And then my job is to make you play as a team. And so having people reach their maximum potential was what he was all about. That's a very different approach, and it's still not common, even though it's so incredibly successful, and his pyramid of success and all that. People, it's just amazing. How do we lose those amazing lessons? And, people just don't pay attention. It's odd.
They don't. And I loved Wooden. When I was in 8th grade, our basketball banquet was at a place called the Worthington Inn, and it was an old Pony Express stop, and we were waiting to be seated, and they had a little shop there, and they had a little kind of carousel that had books on it, and his book They Call Me Coach was there. And I went to my mom and dad, and I'm like, hey, I want to buy this book. And my parents were like, really, you want to read? It's like all you do is play basketball, so you want to actually read? And I'm like, yes, I did. And I could not put it down. And I just his, yes, I think his definition of success, I've never heard a better definition. And it was this: success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing that you did the best to become the best that you're capable of becoming. And like you say, here's this coach who's winning 7 national championships in a row, and that definition of success does not contain the word win in any way. And on all the interviews I heard from him, he's like, yeah, winning's been great, and I've got all these trophies and stuff, but what I care about is developing character in my players so that they can go out and be better husbands, better fathers, better teachers, better whatever they end up doing in their life. And I think for him, that's what really mattered. I could care less what you, I mean, can you tell me who won the national championship in basketball 5 years ago?
No.
I can't.
Oh, no, absolutely.
But can you tell me, some of the players that played on his team, what they did, how they made a contribution to life after basketball? That's what made him, and I think as a coach, that should be what you're about. It shouldn't be about wins and losses. It should be about developing your players.
Yeah. And developing you as an individual. Yeah, just the whole philosophy. And the thing that's remarkable to me, not everybody is awful. I don't mean that at all. There's some amazing coaches that are still out there today, but you have this this model for how to live your life that was so incredibly successful. And it's amazing how it just sort of fades away over time. And people don't embrace that. It actually reminds me of a recent quote that I heard from Elon Musk, who said, people forget how to do things. And unless you preserve it, and that is an effort. You have to work to preserve it. And he was talking specifically about going to space, but he shared examples of, when the Egyptians built the pyramids, we look at them today, and there's all kinds of theories about how they did it. What were the tools they used? How did they make this happen? How are they so perfect? How are they so symmetrical? I mean, it is mind blowing, knowing what they had available to them, and these things turned out to be what they were. Nobody really knows how they made them. That was lost to history. We can't do that as humans. We have to preserve. What does it mean to grow and perfect ourselves as human beings? And who have gone before that can teach us some lessons? Anyway, I'm sort of going down a rabbit hole, but
No, but you're right. But that's about culture. I mean, do you think, Coach K, taught the freshmen about culture? No. The upperclassmen taught the freshmen about culture based on, Krzyzewski's first few years at Duke when they were terrible.
Right.
And, there's that story that he tells about, I forget who they played, but they got blown out. And the coaches went, to a diner afterwards and were having dinner. And, I guess we're having a few adult beverages, and somebody raised a glass and said, here's to forgetting this win. And Krzyzewski's like, here's to forgetting this loss. And Krzyzewski was like, here's to never forgetting this loss.
Yeah.
What did we learn from this? Wooden was great. Yeah, you want to develop his players, but he sweated the small stuff. I mean, I remember stories about him where at the beginning of basketball season, he would bring everybody into the locker room and teach them how to put their socks on. Like, wait a minute. These are 18, 19, 21-year-old. You haven't learned how to put your socks on. Not the way I'm going to teach you how to put your socks on. So if you can do those little things, you sweat the little things, you're going to be good at the big things.
Yes. Yeah, it's all little stuff.
It is.
So tell us about your 4 truths. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, the 4 truths are kind of what I consider the sort of the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place to start to build a quality life off of. They're one sentence each. I have them on a Post-it note. They're sitting right here in front of me. So I see them multiple times during the day, and they constantly get reinforced in my mind. First one is, you need to control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. And I remember when I was in high school, when I was like 14, 15, ended up having like 3 knee surgeries. And when I went back playing, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since these surgeries, and college coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. So I realized early on in life that I needed to flip that switch, to kind of change the narrative to something positive. And if you think about it, our minds can hold one thought at a time. Why would you want to make that a negative thought? So that's the first truth. The second truth we've kind of touched on a little bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more determined individual. And I think that's where the, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional part, and, taking pain and flipping it inside and burning it as fuel. I think that's where all that fits together. The third one is kind of a legacy truth, for lack of a better word. I think regardless of what stage of life we're in, we should all think about sort of the end game. What are people going to think about us, or what are people going to say about us at our funeral? And maybe more importantly, what do we want people to say about us? But the third one is this: what we leave behind is what we weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one, I think is rather self-explanatory. It's, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I guess the way that resonates with me is that, someday my pain is going to end, may end through surgery, may end through some type of new medication. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give in to pain, then pain will always be a part of my life. So those are the 4 truths.
Excellent. I'm telling you, man.
That's good
I'm
stuff.
getting
I
pumped
know.
up just sitting here listening
I
to
know.
this stuff.
That's
Right?
what I mean. That's what
Yeah.
I mean. That's what I got from the book. It was great to hear all of these pieces. So
Very cool.
I do have another question, or actually an area I'd like you to comment on,
Sure.
because I believe it. And you write in your book that everyone is born to lead an extraordinary life. There are a whole bunch of people, dare I say, probably most people who are alive today on this planet don't know that, or don't believe that, or both. And even if even if the thought has entered their mind, they don't believe it. Most people are called to live an extraordinary life. I truly believe that. And, one of the tasks that we have as sort of leaders in our world is, how do we help people understand that they can live an extraordinary life? And what would you say to people who are struggling with that issue?
I think some of the things I've already said about, keep moving forward, search for it with an open heart. But I think, we're so focused now on, goals and New Year's resolutions and all that kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the piece that we're missing, I think the piece that comes first is determining your values. What are you? I bet if you asked most young people, if you looked at them and said, what in your life or what in this world would you be willing to lay your life down for? I bet 99% of them wouldn't be able to give you an answer.
Yeah.
And I think it's important before, we start figuring all this stuff out. What are your values? What's in your heart? What are you being led to do? What are you good at? What do you have an interest in that maybe if you don't do it, will never get done? But that comes from determining what your values are, what matters. Once you determine your values, then I think setting your goals based on what your values are, you'll be a lot more successful than, I gotta be a millionaire by the time I'm 30, and I've got to drive a Lamborghini, and I've got to live in a mansion, and I've got I tell the story. I may have told it in the book. Podcast and book are kind of all running together. My wife had a mentor. My wife's in the financial services industry. Had a mentor who was a kind of a bigwig in one of the big financial services companies in New York. Had a house in Greenwich, Connecticut. Had an apartment in Manhattan. Was married. Had 3 kids. Was on several boards. Was on the board of a prestigious Ivy League business school. If you would have looked at this guy, you would have said, by all intents and purposes, he was successful. But several years ago, he ended up taking his own life. And he was so focused on his persona and what this was all about that his marriage deteriorated, and he lost the relationship with his children. And he ended up getting divorced. And after the divorce in the 2008, sort of stock market crash where he lost a lot of money, he rebounded. And he dated some fairly high profile individuals in New York and eventually married an artist, bought another mansion in Connecticut, and seemed to have his life together, but then died by his own hand. And it was funny for me, wasn't funny. It was interesting for me to listen to what his friends said about him on social media. How by all intents and purposes, this was a guy who had it all, who was successful, who was powerful, who was rich, and yet he died by his own hand. So it's not about power. It's not about money. It's not about influence. You can't take any of that with you beyond the grave. What you can take beyond the grave is the love that you have in your heart.
Mm. And that's where it all ends, right? That's, what is it, rule number 10?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That one gave me chills.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's and there's far too many people like that living that existence. And it's I think in many of those cases, it's because they're relying and actually all those things that he had, instead of being, things that you look at and celebrate, they should have potentially been clues that he may have been trying to compensate for an inner peace that he didn't have, an inner turmoil that he was dealing with, and trying to replace that or try to make it better by having all these material things. And material things are not bad.
No.
So don't get me wrong there. and at the same time, I mean, you see that you see these people that are extremely successful, have lots of material things, and they're utterly tormented and miserable on the inside. The Judd, was it Naomi that just committed suicide?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same kind of scenario. Incredibly talented artist, was about to receive an award that people work their entire
Lifetime achievement. Yeah.
yeah. They're and I think, just a tormented soul, and I don't know, certainly can't think of her inner thinkings and what would cause her to do that. But there's just so many scenarios like that where people that seem to have it all are tormented inside. And I think there's people and I guarantee you there's people in every one of our lives right now that are living like that, and we just haven't connected the dots. So pay attention,
Yeah.
because you might be the difference. You might be the one that figures it out and extends a hand to them that'll make a difference.
And that's an incredibly good point, because people, as I mentioned, one of the things I did was I was a hostage negotiator on a SWAT team, and people used to always say, well, yeah, I thought he was acting weird, or he was he was giving things away, and he was doing all the things that were raising red flags in people's life. And I'm like, well, why didn't you say something to him? Oh, I didn't want to say anything because I might put that thought into his mind. And that's one thing that I learned as a negotiator. I mean, we would ask people if we were negotiating, be like, hey, Bob, are you thinking of killing yourself? Or are you thinking of harming yourself? Whatever, the language that was appropriate. And if the person wasn't thinking that, they'd go off on you. It's like, no, Terry, you're an idiot. Why would you even say that? But if they were, it's just like you said, you're extending a hand. Hey, I'm here to help. I'm opening a door that you think is closed. It's not closed. I'm here to help you. And so if people are out there listening to us and they think there's a friend or a colleague or somebody they work with or whatever, that maybe their behavior has changed, maybe that you think they might be harming themselves, if you think that, ask them. Ask them, because you may give them the hand that they need so that they don't do it.
Amen.
Amen.
No doubt. Hostage negotiator. I love that. Although in my younger days, I was the guy that was on the entry team wanting you to finish so that we could go and kick the door in.
I know they hated that. They got to sit outside.
Finish that negotiating. Let us do our job.
Exactly. It's like, no, we want this peaceful. See, negotiators are smart. We're in the RV with the bathroom and the food and the drink. You guys are out surrounding the house in 10-degree weather, and it's like, God, hurry up. I hope this guy does something so we can go in.
I had one scenario where I happened to, because we were a collateral duty team, and so we were all working patrol, and I ended up having to take a call that dispatch transferred to me from a guy who had barricaded himself in a house. And the only saving grace for me having to spend that time in somewhat of a negotiating capacity with that knucklehead was I knew that I'd be one of the guys that went in there and got him, because he was acting like a complete jackass. And it didn't end up working out that way. He came out, but yeah.
I'll tell you a quick funny story. And we were in Cincinnati. We were a part-time SWAT team. We carried pagers. Again, how old am I? We carried pagers. We didn't have cell phones, so we carried pagers. Pager goes off. I was working that night. I get to the scene. I'm like, what's the deal? Like, he's barricaded himself. He's drunk. He's got a gun, and his wife's in there. I'm like, okay. Do you have him on the phone? Yeah. And I mean, and from doing this, you don't ask usually in the first several hours for the person to come out, because you want them to burn off a lot of that emotional energy, and you want them using their rational brain to make decisions, not their emotional brain. But I had this guy on the phone for 10 minutes, and I just thought, I'm going to take a shot here. I said to him, what would it take for you to come out? There was a long pause, and he's like, give me a beer. I said, if I gave you a beer, do I have your word that you would come out? He said, do I have your word that I could drink it? And I said, you do have my word. He said, then give me a beer. So I gave $5 to one of the uniformed guys. I said, go down to the store, buy a beer. Tactical team put it on the front porch, called him back and said, hey, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it until your wife comes out. You put the gun down and you come out with your hands up. He's like, do I still have your word I can drink the beer? I said, you still have my word. All of a sudden, the front door flies open. Here comes his wife. Here he comes with his hands up. We handcuff him, let him drink the beer. Off to jail he goes.
That's a good story.
Yeah. It's a shame they don't all work out like that.
Yeah, isn't it? Right.
So Terry, you probably, or maybe not, I don't know. I mean, you've done enough of these, but there may be things that you want to make sure you communicate. This has been a wonderful conversation, and you're a fascinating person, and I would love to chat with you more, honestly. But for the purposes of this podcast, is there something that you want to make sure that you get out there for our listening audience that, not that you'll lose sleep over it, but that's kind of in the normal realm of things that you like to communicate? Is there anything you'd really like to make sure we get out there, in addition to how do people get in touch with you if they want to?
I'll answer the last one first. So motivationalcheck.com, you mentioned that is my website. You can leave me a message there. Every day I put up a thought for the day, and with that comes a question about maybe how you could apply that to your life. On Mondays, I put up the Monday morning motivational message. So motivationalcheck.com will get you to me. And I'll end with this final story. And I love telling this story. Always been a big fan of Westerns growing up. When I was younger, my mom and dad used to let me stay up late and watch, Bonanza and Gunsmoke. And my favorite was Wild Wild West. Yeah. 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You may have seen it, huge blockbuster, still being shown on reruns on different stations now. Yeah. It starred Val Kilmer as a man by the name of John Doc Holliday, and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp were two living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They're not made up characters just for the movie. Doc was called Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a gunslinger and a card shark. Wyatt Earp, most of his adult life, had been a lawman. And yet these two men from entirely divergent backgrounds somehow come together and form this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from where I live. The real Doc Holliday died at that sanitarium. He's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money, he has no job, there's no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And in this almost last scene of the movie, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was younger, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all that I ever wanted. And then he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt kind of nonchalantly says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life. And get on with living yours. Gentlemen, you and I, we all know people that are kind of sitting out there and being like, well, when this happens, I'll have a normal life. Or when this arises, I'll have a successful life. Or when this occurs, I'll have a significant life. What I'd like to leave you with is this. Don't wait. Don't wait for life to come to you. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth. Use your unique gifts and talents and live that reason. Because if you do, at the end of your life, I'm going to promise you two things. Number one, you're going to be a whole lot happier. And number two, you're going to have a whole lot more peace in your heart.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got nothing.
Love that, man. Love it. That certainly will it's getting me pumped up. I appreciate that. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
I would just detract from that. So thank you. That was awesome.
Well, thank you both for having me on. I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
You bet, Terry. It's been wonderful to chat with you and to actually cross paths. Brian and I both appreciate it very much. And you truly are a remarkable individual. And thank you for giving us a little of your time and, a big part of your talents as you've spent time with us today. And I hope our paths cross again.
I would like that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, you ready for me to wrap this up?
I'm ready, Brian. Do it.
Stand by.
All right.
I didn't hit it hard enough.
No, you didn't.
I have to say something, don't I? No matter who you are, where you are, what you're doing, make sure between this podcast and the next, you take time to enjoy the ride.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Graybeard Chronicles. Please subscribe so you'll receive notification when new episodes are available. To learn more about the Graybeards, visit their website, graybeardchronicles.com.